Our next presenter is Kim Sedore, and I was lucky enough to actually run into Kim a couple of months ago at a conference. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I learned about Kim at that conference to show how multi-talented she is just from that one meeting. So she led a workshop at the conference teaching people how to make lanterns out of snow, okay? And then I soon learned that she was actually one of the organizers of the conference, it's a significant conference as well. And she also turned out to be the banjo player in the band for the square dance at night. So Kim has many bases covered. She also takes people out paddling in Voyageur canoes. The business is called Same Boat Adventures because everybody is in the same boat. And they do adventures down rivers in the backcountry, in rural areas, as well as in urban areas. So they go down the Humber River as well. Please help me welcome Kim Sedore.
Thanks, Katie. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. I'll begin by acknowledging that this is sacred land that we're on. It's been the site of human activity for 15,000 years. This land has been the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nation and the Seneca, and more recently the Mississauga of the Credit. Okay, so my main topic today is wilderness therapy from an unclinical perspective. I titled the talk Together, to Gather, to Get There. And one of the reasons for that, it just plays, no sound. This is just something pretty to look at while I talk. I don't actually have a slide presentation. A while ago, I started thinking that we should be spelling the word together, Togather, because when we're together, we are gathered together. And then as I was making one of the least ambitious campaigns to change the spelling of a word online, somebody piped up and said, oh, maybe it means to get there. And I was like, oh, maybe it does. So anyways, there could be two other ways to look at the word, and I just wanted to kind of insinuate that with the title of my talk. But yeah, wilderness therapy as basically an experience that I've had recently and something that I will get into right now. I worked as a wilderness, and it's called the Wilderness Field Instructor for a school called Pine River Institute from October 2014 until this past April 2016. So it's a year-round program for teenagers who are struggling with addictions, behavior problems, and basically they've come to a point in their lives where there's been what we call a global breakdown in their life. So relationships with family are in complete turmoil. They're not going to school. They're engaging in a lot of risky behavior, a lot of drugs, alcohol, sometimes not drugs and alcohol, maybe video game addiction, maybe violent outbursts, trouble with the police. And it's usually the family that contacts the school to see if that would be the right avenue to pursue to get help for their children and also for themselves as a family. There's an interview process, and if it seems like this would be an appropriate place for a teenager to go, they're usually put on a wait list for between 6 months and a year and a half, which is quite a long time to wait when you're in turmoil. So if anybody has big bucks and want to donate to Pine River Institute to speed up the process of kids being able to get in there, please do contact the school with your donation. But the school is largely funded by OHIP, and so there is, which is wonderful, but it does mean that there is a wait list. Basically, it's a very successful program, and it was an extremely powerful experience to work as a guide for Pine River Institute. I saw a lot of kids, teenagers, young adults, totally turn their life around. And it was also one of the hardest jobs I've had to date. So it was very rewarding, and it was also very challenging personally. I think that if I were to generalize the main reasons that it is a successful program, it can be summed up in saying that it is a program that is land-based, and basically the benefits of being put back into your body when you're living in the bush, when you're camping out, you can't underestimate the impact that that can have on a person to the positive. And also the element of living in community with adult role models, and also in a community of peers, and being held accountable for your actions. I would say that's the second element of the program that makes it extremely effective. But what I'd like to do is just kind of break it down a bit more than that, so that you get an idea for what is involved. Okay, so the entire program is split between the first section, which is the woods component of the program, and that's 2 months in the bush. And then after 2 months in the bush, the kids transition to the school, which is north of Shelburne, and it's a boarding school setting and at an old outdoor education facility near the Pine River. And that's where they get back into their academics. It's an extremely structured program there with lots of therapy sessions, individual and group therapy sessions, tons of outdoor education, and they're there for upwards of a year, and then they're gradually transitioning home, and then they go home, they graduate, and they're still involved with what's called after-school care, which is they're still in touch with one of their therapists from the school for quite a bit of time as they're reestablishing themselves back home. For a lot of you, I'm sure the idea of going out into the bush for 2 months is like a dream come true. And I liked working there. Being a bushy person, it was perfect for me too. But for these kids, a lot of whom have never been camping before or carried a backpack with anything more than their school books in it, and even at that, maybe it's been a while since they had school books in their backpack, they're leaving everything that they've come to rely upon. Even though they had unhealthy coping mechanisms back home, they were their coping mechanisms, and they're leaving all of that behind. So going into 2 months in the bush with a bunch of strangers, most of whom are also struggling with their own stuff, is absolutely terrifying. So, yeah. I think that doing this talk is actually part of my own therapeutic process in digesting my own experience of having done that work. And there are people out there right now who are doing it. It's constant, it's year-round. If you go in the winter for your 2 months, you're winter camping for 2 months. If you go in April, you've got the bugs. And if you're there in August and September, you're very lucky. We would be paddling from May until October, and then hiking and snowshoeing, depending on the weather, from October until May. So really, there are just 2 seasons up there. And sometimes you could either distinguish it paddling and hiking, or tents and tarps, because we'd have tents when there were bugs out, and then other than that, we'd be sleeping under these tarps, which were quite lovely, because it always was fresher smelling. Mm-hmm. So basically, we've got the staff who are very compassionate, caring people, and absolutely hell-bent on helping these kids. We're told that you have 24 hours to build a relationship with a new student, and if you don't, then they will run away, which So it sounds like a tall order, but it's true. You need to get to know these kids and basically earn their trust very quickly. They need to know that you will keep them safe, and they also need to know that you see them, that you recognize them, and that you're capable of empathizing with them. The other aspect of this community beyond staff is the community of peers. And as everybody knows, teenagers are very sensitive to their reputation with their peers. And that is actually to the advantage, to everybody's advantage, because we were using this term called positive peer pressure. And it's basically this idea that the consciousness of the group will help keep everybody kind of self-aware to an extent. And when somebody isn't being helpful or maybe is even being a little bit awful to somebody else or to themselves, it's often the peers that are the people who are very effective at holding each other accountable. That was a really big thing, like kind of reckoning for me when I got out there. Because you go in, you're like, okay, I got all my skills, I got all this stuff, and then it's like, holy smokes, these guys are actually doing a lot of the work themselves and for each other, and that was a really inspiring and beautiful thing to see. And then there's the community of the land, and the fact that this happens in the bush in a very physical environment can't be ignored. I think that that's one of the reasons it's such a powerful experience and such an effective experience. These kids and staff are getting back into their bodies, like I said earlier, and I've started using the terminology to describe this. Our bodies are our first home, and it's a home that we carry everywhere we go. And our relationship to ourselves and the way that we treat our bodies is preliminary. You have to treat yourself well, and then you can go forward out of that. So that might seem really obvious to everybody, but I don't know. I just feel like it's something that we can't take for granted anymore in these days, that people are at home in their bodies. We will think twice about spending small fortunes on yoga, to have somebody teach us how to breathe again and how to feel the ground with your feet. So the fact that we have these experiences of going into the wilderness and have this relationship with the land, I just think that's such a precious thing and something to be so grateful for, because it's a direct connection to a big part of ourselves. Mm-hmm. And when Adrian and Dave were talking last night about feeling the cold creeping into their parkas when they're hiking in the frozen lands, it's like, you feel that, you feel the earth, you feel that cold creeping in, and you respond, and you bundle up a little bit more. You make sure you eat that fried peanut butter and jam sandwich, or 5, and as we respond, we become responsible, and we learn to become responsible for ourselves and to each other. And that sense of developing that sense of responsibility and developing that sense of self-care is perhaps a step that some of these kids that I was helping might have skipped in their development earlier. So this is a chance for them to learn the benefits of thinking about your future self and your current needs, and how that math equates, and how your behavior will influence your experience. Mm-hmm. And I would also like to mention structure. The structure of the program, I come from a background where chaos is really fun. Like everything's always crazy and it's fun, and that's like the party. And I got out there and I realized that I had to change my ways. A lot of these kids are coming from a situation where they either don't have enough structure, or they had so much structure and they're rebelling against it. But either way, there's this struggle with this concept of structure, and yet structure is what holds you. And when people are coming out of a chaotic situation and feeling vulnerable, which is good to feel vulnerable, but you also need to feel held and secure. That's when the lovely thing about experiencing your vulnerability is knowing that you are safe in that. And these people needed to have the experience of being safe when they're vulnerable. So one of the ways that we are able to provide that is by providing structure through the program, and that included all sorts of things. I'll mention a few. One of them was basically turning routine into ritual through ceremony. It's a secular program, but we made certain things very special. So before a meal, anybody who cooked the meal, it could have been a student or staff, would, just before the meal's ready to be served, they'd say, "I'd like to call a moment of silence." And no matter where somebody was in the space or what they were doing, everybody had to stop and be quiet for as long as the chef had decided, and then they'd say, "Moment." And that marked the end of the moment of silence. And it had to be at least 30 seconds long. Sometimes it was really long, and it was always honored. If somebody missed the cue or whatever, we'd be like, "Okay, call it again. I'd like to call a moment of silence." It'd happen again. And it was amazing. I was always amazed at how respectful everybody was of this moment of silence. And it really was a lovely moment. It can get loud out there with a bunch of teenagers. So a moment of silence, we do, there's a whole bead system where people were earning beads for cooking a bunch for the group, learning their knots and shelters, learning how to build a fire with slag stone and metal file, leading a group activity. There are several beads. So we'd have goal-setting ceremonies at the beginning of a week, and a bead ceremony at the end of the week to reward people. There'd be a transition ceremony whenever a student transitioned to the school, and there'd be a circle with all sorts of positive memories of that time in the bush with the student, and some advice for the school. And interestingly, the transition ceremony is usually the first thing that a new student would witness going into the bush, because every week there'd be a new student in and a seasoned student going to the school. So the new student would witness somebody who had just finished 2 months in the bush going to the school, and here they have this 2 months ahead. And for them, I know it felt like they were going to be there for the rest of their life. So to see somebody going, it's kind of like watching little dragonfly larvae hatch. And yeah, that ceremonial entrance into the program, I think, it just adds a lot to this sense that you're doing something special, that you have the power to honor something special, and it becomes much more effective that way. Another ceremony that we would do is called a feelings check question, and we would do that at night, just before bed. Or after dinner and before people started getting ready for bed. And somebody would come up with a question, and it would need to be some sort of allegorically based question. If you were a body of water, what would you be? Like right now, not just what would you like to be forever, but with your feelings right now, how do you feel? Are you a raging river? Are you a calm lake? Are you a mud puddle? Are you a waterfall? And you go around and people would say how they felt, what they felt like, and then they'd say why. And I think that this attention to thinking symbolically was really important, and giving everybody chances like this on a daily basis. It happened, there were other things that we did to make sure that everybody had chances on a daily basis to express themselves, but this was one of them. And to express yourself creatively and symbolically with an audience of witnesses, I think that that was also a really powerful exercise for people, and it helped them see how they can relate to events in nature, and happenings in nature, and to be able to draw parallels between their own life experience and things that they were seeing on all these other levels of life around them. Basically, they learned to see that they were trailblazing their lives. This was one of my big talks that I would have with kids as we were hiking. I'd be like, okay, it's like when you first start trailblazing, it's all rough and you get all the sticks in your face and you don't know where you're going and you need to make all these decisions in your direction. And then the next time you go over the trail, it's a little less tough. You've maybe got a few flagging tape markers, and you remember that there's a log up there you have to step over. Third time, fourth time, it just gets exponentially easier. And that's basically what we were hoping would happen with a lot of the students out there, is they were basically carving these new directions for themselves in the ways that they were thinking, the ways that they were learning to cope with stress, with their depression or anxiety, with their attention control troubles, learning new ways of approaching very common and problems or challenges. I think that's pretty much all I'll say about that. Before I go, I'll just say I've been running a guiding company with a Voyageur canoe. It's 29 feet long, and I brought a measuring tape and measured it out. So it goes from, if the canoe was on the stage right now, it would go from here to over here. It'll go to here. And it can fit 13 of you in it at a time. So if you ever want to go for a paddle in a Voyageur canoe, whether you're consciously thinking about wanting some wilderness therapy or not, I'm always happy to bring people out. It's a really neat way to experience the water and that sense of community and being one of a group. It's just incredible. It's a very stable canoe. It's very accessible. And a lot of people, it's a very safe experience. Everybody's right together, even when the wind picks up. You're all right there together. And it's just an interesting experience. And actually, it's bizarre how unintuitive it is for a lot of people to paddle at the same time. Like the first few times, I've learned lots of tips and tricks to help a group be synchronized. But you wouldn't believe how, if you just say, okay, everybody, we're going to paddle together, even if it's a canoe full of paddlers, it's like, everybody's, out of sync. And then eventually, it does happen, and they get it, and that form together is a very beautiful feeling. And one time I was in Sibbald Point Provincial Park having a jam with a bunch of my buddies playing fiddle and banjo music for 2 days. We got in the canoe, and I hadn't thought to say anything about how to paddle together. We got in the canoe, and everybody was right together. And I noticed, because this was very unusual. I was like, why is this happening? And then I was like, oh yeah, we've been playing music together for 2 full days. We've been in rhythm together for 2 full days. And it was just such a natural response. We changed our medium. We were doing the exact same thing that we had been doing. And I think for me, and I'm pretty sure I'm preaching to the choir on this one, but living in community, sharing those moments, and being in our bodies together, I think is just such a privilege. And thank you for supporting the endeavor.